Hey there guys, Templar here, and today I'll be talking to you guys about an era in time that we have pretty much forgotten in history, but it's pretty much remembered through the historical aspects of time. Now, what is this era, you might ask? Well, this era is technically the time that came sometime after the fall of the Roman Empire, or in this case the Western Roman Empire, and ended during the time of the Viking Age. This is the era of the Vendels. The Vendel period is probably one of my favorite forms in ancient history. Well, anyways, in Dark Age history, anyways. Now, when we think of Vendel period history, we normally don't understand that much. We mistaken it for Vikings, for example. But in truth, the Vendel period is more of like Sutton Hoo. It's more of like Beowulf. In other words, this was old-fashioned, old English era. In other words, pretty much the armor and equipment was 3 times different compared to what we might see later on during the Viking Age. Because the Viking Age era was a different era. Now I'm going to you guys already. Was the Vendel period a time of enlightenment? Well, actually yes. In which this is actually the really cool thing about this part in the Dark Ages. You know, when we think of the Dark Ages, we think complete darkness. There is no form of light in knowledge. But in truth, that was completely false. In fact, that information was first started by a bunch of Victorian idealists who technically did not know that much about history. Now, here's the thing. The Vendel period was actually labeled one of the most impressive eras of ancient history that was brought back to the world. In fact, knowledge and education was reimbursed by the cultures that actually came around during the Vendel period, such as the Lombards, the Franks, the Anglo-Saxons, and many other kingdoms. Now, when we think of this type of period in history, we might also wonder, was this period an era of peace? Well, yes and no. Because, estimated in history books, it was stated that there were many times there were kingdoms of peace, but as well there were also kingdoms of war. Now, these kingdoms of war would pretty much be along the Western Roman Empire region, such as pretty much with the Muslim Moors, who would actually attack the innocent Christians. Now, I don't know if you guys don't know this, but Muslim Moors were kind of like the ISIS of the ancient age, so yeah. Until they were finally beaten in the Battle of Tours, pretty much which the Franks won. Now, this actually is also what gave many modern borders. Now, during the time of the Franks and such, or as well the Saxons, or the Lombards, or including the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and so on, when they created their own kingdoms, these kingdoms were pretty much one of the last bastions of knowledge. Because if you guys don't realize this, in the Western Roman Empire, by the time it came to the late Roman Empire, by the time it fell, the Western Roman Empire became uneducated in many forms. Reason why it had become too powerful for its own good. Now, in doing so, seeing as though there was so much darkness in this region of the Western Roman Empire, it's actually estimated that many Vendel era kings actually established, well, laws, and including many schools, which were not run by the church until Charles the Great or Charles the Hammer actually later on placed it upon it, and including later on Charlemagne himself. Now, it is kind of impressive of how they did this though, but they even stated that the word of God must lie with the word of God, but the word of knowledge must die with the word of knowledge. Now that words was actually spoken by a monk, Brother Almeciglas. Now Almeciglas died around the year of 609 AD, and he himself was a true Christian. In fact, he actually died a bishop by the time he, well, had passed away. Of where his, nowadays, we still don't know this actually, we don't even know where his body is laid to rest nowadays, which is kind of disappointing. But now when we think of ancient Vendel period, we normally just think Vikings. Well, that's because the Vendel period looks a lot like the Viking Age, but in truth it wasn't, because there is a difference between the armors, but I'll get to that at some other time. But now, here's another thing in history that we also I need to mention to you guys. As I stated about Sutton Hoo, well, Sutton Hoo is a burial site that's for the Vendel Age king of the Anglo-Saxon era. Now, pretty much I will also leave many links down below for you guys, so that way you can see the difference between Vikings and such, and which they will give a little more answer to it. But as well, the Vendel period is also known as the Germanic Period, when the Western Roman Empire was turned into a Germanic Western world, such as Britannia, Spain, Portugal, France, and Italy, and including Switzerland. Many parts of the Western Roman Empire that actually was controlled by the Western Roman Empire was now part of the Germanic kingdoms. Now, pretty much, if it wasn't for this age in history, then the Vendel period, in this point, pretty much then we wouldn't have modern language such as English, French, and Italian, or including Spanish and Portuguese. So, yeah, you can see there. But now I can hear you guys already. But Templar, those are Latin. Well, the thing is, the term Latin actually stays in Latin form. But when the Lombards tried to learn Latin, they kind of, well, weren't so good at it. So it became Italian. Same with the French. When they tried to speak Latin, they failed at it, and in the process created the language of French. When in truth, if you look at their pre-Germanic languages, it was extremely different. How so? Well, that's hard to explain, really. But in truth, we do realize that in points of history, this was probably the most impressive era in history. Now, I have heard, though, that many people say, Templar, this era was the most dumbest era in history. There is no knowledge to learn from this. Well, that's actually where you're wrong. In fact, the Vendel period actually did bring back many forms of architecture, and as well brought back a form of, well, literature. Including, actually, a type of form of democracy. Now, I can hear you guys already. Democracy? Really? Well, this is actually people that don't realize this, but the Germanic people were like a confederation of tribes, meaning that they were unified for one thing, democracy. Though this form of democracy was a little different compared to ours, but I'll get to that some other time. Anyways, they would pretty much vote and so on. In doing so, the form of voting was like a noble lords. In other words, this brought form the age of knighthood, though the idealism of knights would not be seen for another 100 years or so. But this was technically an early age, anyways. Now, though, the cool part about the Vendel period is that it was so mysterious. Because literally, because when we think of the Viking period, we think rotting barbarians. Well, technically that's what we thought of the Vendel period, but in truth it wasn't always like that. Now, the Vendels themselves, during the time of the Vendel period itself, you had different cultures, and they had different types of, well, ships, and so on, from Germanic territory. Now, to be fair, the Saxons were from Denmark, so, yeah. But now, the Vendel period technically, most of the time, covers this land of the new Germanic kingdoms that were established. Now, these were technically fought over between brothers and sons, yada yada yada, you get the point. But now, why did the Vendel period begin during the end of the during the time of the fall of the Western Roman Empire and start to decay during the time of the Viking Age? Well, that's actually a thing. The Viking Age was seen as another prequest of the so-called Vendel period. When in truth, the Vendel period was a little different, actually, because the Vendel period was actually an age of enlightenment was brought back. When the Vikings came, it kind of destroyed more enlightenment. So, yeah, there's a difference. But as well, something else came from the Vendel period. Guess what it is? It's probably one of the type of things that actually is known by being the most holy, yet it's not. Being the most Roman, but yet it's not. and only be called an empire just because of its size. Give up? The Holy Roman Empire. Now, the Holy Roman Empire did begin with Charlemagne, in which this is actually really impressive. He started his empire a small amount. Now, if you guys don't realize this, the Holy Roman Empire is not Roman Empire. It is not holy at all. In fact, there's nothing even related to be holy or Roman. So, yeah. Now, you guys might ask, why was it called that? Well, that's the complicated part. But now, this is actually the cool thing about the Holy Roman Empire. First starts in the land of France, then actually expands into the former lands of Germany, or modern Germany anyways, and somewhere further east, and as well takes part of Italy. Doing so, the Holy Roman Empire is huge. Now as well though, when Charlemagne dies, he divides it between his three sons. His three sons pretty much divided between France, Eastern Germany, and Central Germany, and the Central Holy Roman Empire. Now, though the Frankish kingdom survived, but the rest of the Holy Roman Empire technically went to one of the brothers. In doing so, they pretty much won, and blah blah blah, get the whole point. But now, this is also the cool part about the Holy Roman Empire. Its sophistication with technology. It had actually engineered a type of cuckoo clock. I would say cuckoo clock, but it's not a cuckoo clock. It's more of like a regular clock anyways. Like around 30 some, like around like say 400 or technically 500 years before the age of invention. It was actually put back. In other words, it's like this. It's kind of long before the age of, well, the Industrial Revolution, and long before the medieval age, before a clockwork was invented like this. This type of clockwork was actually first made with sundial. Now, this type of sundial idealism was a little weird, but this was known as a moon dial. Now, I wasn't the one who named it, don't get me wrong, it sounds like a good idea, but it does work, actually. This type of idealism of systematic innovation actually worked due to the type of melting of a type of candle wax, or so I'm told. Much of this type of former clock kind of died off with the Vendel period. So yeah, we can see why during the time of the Vikings, or including the time of the High Medieval Age, that this clock went out of style. Especially since not that many people would have been outside, so during the night, I could see why. But as well, this is actually the cool part about the Vendel period. Another cool part about it is that it held history throughout the ages. And as well, when we see Viking helmets, we normally think of a, say, oh, I don't know, say a helmet, like a normal Viking helm, like all decked out with horns or whatever. Well, no, that's, by example, that's not a real Viking helmet. A real Viking helmet is this. Now, this is actually one of the Viking helmets in history, but the Vendel period helmet would look a little more like this. See the difference? Now, I can already hear you guys already, Templar, these look exactly the same. Well, actually, they're not. There's actually a very big difference. Take a look at the artwork involved. The Vendel period had gorgeous artwork upon the helmets, upon the armor and weaponry. It's like fit for a king. And now I can already hear you guys already. Templar, you're definitely gonna start getting into the weapons, aren't you? I would if I could. I wish I could get into this, but technically there are too many kingdoms just for one Vendel period. So in other words, I'm gonna have to wait for a while. But as well, when we also think of the Vendel period, this also occurred in history when the Byzantine Empire tried to reclaim parts of the former Roman Empire. They managed to take back Sicily, part of Italy, and including part of the former lands of Carthage, but quickly lost it again, mainly due to the Muslim Moors. So, well, all but Italy, but still, but Sicily, it's complicated there. Until one day the Normans come around and retake the lands of Italy and Sicily. You gotta thank the Normans for that. But now, pretty much also in history books, we do know that there are a lot of weird things that we don't realize about the Vendel period. But another cool thing is actually the surprising amount of knowledge that were forgotten. Now, I can hear you guys already. Templar, there was no knowledge anywhere in history. Well, that's what you might want to think, but it's not true at all. In fact, by the time of the Vendel period first began, it's actually stated that Charlemagne had actually rebuilt monasteries and schools all together, and as well, he even stated that the knowledge of the world is given to us by God, and to destroy this knowledge, we are truly the monsters of this earth. In which, upon saying these words, many people actually started to learn to read the Bible in different languages. Even Charlemagne ordered this to be so. Though later on in history, some people actually just stated to actually just write in Latin to make it a lot easier. Bunch of party poopers right there. But now, this was actually the cool part about these creation of the Vendel period. Upon writing these if you guys don't realize, yes, monks had to write all this shit down before the first printer was made in Germany. So, yeah. But in doing so, they had to take a pen and quill and start writing it slowly. They couldn't just rush all through it like... You can't just do that. You gotta take a very slow amount of time. In fact, one page could probably take around 1 to 2 hours, maybe 3. It's hard to say, because you gotta follow the same amount of detail work. And this is like for example, if I was a monk creating the holy pages of our Lord Almighty, what I would have to do is pretty much, first guy would have to write it down, all the same letters and such, the correct same way. The next, I had to give it to another guy, who then has to do the artwork. And then finally, if I'm going to get all those pages all together, I got to get another guy to technically get it all secured in place. But still, this was impressive back then, even today's work. In fact, many people even saw this as a chance to become holy to God. Now, in doing so, actually, Charlemagne even suggested the fact to actually allow the young children to actually, work upon the books. And in fact, this was actually allowed by many Christian churches. Because pretty much by this point in time, it's actually impressive how it worked. Now, as well, during the time of the Vendel period, it's even stated that Charlemagne, in the process, declared war on many pagan Germanic people, in which that also brings me to another idea. This actually is true in history books. It's stated that when the Germans technically tried to convert their own fellow people from paganism to Christianity, they stated to not destroy the holy shrines, but to build near them. In doing so, you're technically connecting to the old gods and the new. Which, it's really impressive if you look this part up in history. But as well, not that many people understand that. Now, I was also informed in the part of history books about this point in time, there is actually incredible points in history that were lost, such as shock armor cavalry that were impervious to arrows. Now, as well, you guys hear about the Hotel the Hun. Well, his Hungarian descendants were later on beaten back by these so-called early forms of medieval knights. Though they weren't knights, so yeah. But you get the point. In which this type of shock cav is known as the Germania Immaculati. Now, these were first formed by Charlemagne's descendant in the Holy Roman Empire. Now, why he gave them an Italian name, I do not know. But it is actually stated that upon using this cavalry, they managed to mow down an entire force of Hungarian forces. Now, this is also the cool part. It's even estimated that at this point in time, there was even a massive window of peace. For example, as soon as the Anglo-Saxons had managed to fully conquer the lands of, well, their region they could have conquered, such as the land of England, for example. Well, here's the thing. There was a massive era of peace. In other words, a 50-year gap before the Viking Age. Literally. This is like through every kingdom. 50 years before the Vikings came. It's stated that the Viking Age destroyed that era of peace in Europe. Now, if you can think about it, the Vendel period is also what actually drove the Vikings to pretty much attacking and, well, raiding. Or as well, we could think of it with Charlemagne when he technically attacked Denmark. When Denmark was still pagan, the Anglo-Saxons, on the other hand, they were more Christianized by now. By this point in time, he pretty much ended up having to fight against the massive amount of groups of, well, pretty much Saxons, who are still pagan. And in doing so, he managed to win. But here's the thing, with the pagans pretty much being attacked, guess what? That's correct. The Viking Age began. But still, this point in history is probably the most forgotten, but yet the most impressive part in history. And yet, people don't realize that we're forgetting it. If you guys want to watch more on these type of subject, I will post links down below in the description area for you guys, so that way you guys can understand more about this form in history. Anyways guys, if you want me to talk about any age in history, let me know down in the comments below. Also like and also hit that bell button, and please subscribe for more, so that way you guys can keep up with these videos. Anyways guys, this has been Templar. Have a good day.